and welcome to another episode of Found in Interpretation Podcast. Once again, I'm one of your co-hosts, Alain Breton, and I'm here with Brian. Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I don't have as much energy as you do, but I'm doing great. And we're
It's a
here
beautiful.
also. Yeah, it's a beautiful day. And we're also
Yes,
here with
yeah.
Mireya. Mireya's here. She's got a big smile. So welcome,
Yeah,
Mireya.
I'm like in between. I'm in between both of you. I'll match both energies somehow.
There you go.
Exactly. That's why right now on the screen, you're right in the middle, right next to both of us. So we're focusing on you right now. So let's kick it. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Mireya Perez because she's our guest this week. So she's a certified interpreter with over a decade experience in medical and K-12 education settings, host and creator of Brand the Interpreter podcast with, I guess, over 100 episodes. Am I wrong?
That's right. Yeah,
That's
no, that's
right.
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she holds a master's degree in communications. She's an advocate for professional language access and visibility of interpreters. She focuses on personal branding for interpreters and language professionals. She uses podcasting and social media to highlight interpreter stories worldwide. Am I forgetting anything?
Or at least I try. No, I don't think so.
So this is kind of the podcast inside of the podcast, the inception of podcast, because you're the host of a podcast. We have a podcast on interpreters. We're here to share notes, share stories. And so first question that comes to mind, what is Brand the Interpreter and how did you start this podcast?
Great question. Thank you. I think Brand the Interpreter is a variety of different things, but it is indeed, at the end of the day, a podcast. And it's dedicated to being able to have a space to share the stories of other language professionals. I now say around the world, but when it first started, that wasn't the case. When it first started, my mind was just in the vicinity where I can commute to, because it was supposed to be an in-person experience. I was supposed to be able to interview other language professionals, where I could drive to them and bring my gear along with me. And then it just became this thing because of COVID, where I went online. And as a result of it, I started interviewing interpreters from anywhere in the world. So it's now a podcast, but it started as a presentation. So it was the title of a presentation.
Do you think that the podcast actually do you think that COVID made your podcast more popular?
Yes, I want to say, I think, if I really had to point out why suddenly everyone, not everyone, but there was more than I anticipated, more than the few people that I had told about, had to be because people were looking for some sort of entertainment or something to do. And perhaps it was the right opportunity, the right time, the right place and time for it to sort of reach a bigger audience.
Now, I love the name Brand the Interpreter. It's a great name, and I love the website. The website's very professional. You've got like everything, like everything's well put together. But where did Brand the Interpreter come from?
It was this idea of being able to share the stories of professional interpreters within community settings specifically. It was born out of this notion of me being able to highlight the difference between a trained interpreter and a bilingual employee, for example, that is utilized to provide interpreting services. And so I sort of did this thing along with colleagues. It took a whole team, but I did this thing where it was like, well, why don't we highlight the difference between these by sending out communications, internal communications to staff, and just really creating this idea of trained professionals versus bilingual individuals, and demonstrate what the difference is. And so it was like this, let's highlight our work, let's highlight our profession by creating different communications that say so, by demonstrating, so it was a variety of techniques. And so one day, years later, after we were able to centralize services within, it was a K through 12 public education school district. We were able to centralize services. We were able to, just create processes and procedures around the trained interpreter now. So not focusing only staff, meaning on bilingual staff to provide the service, but really thinking of our department first before they thought of any other resource, which was the goal. That was the end goal. And so one day it was like, well, there was a local conference for interpreters and translators in education. And so I thought it'd be great if I could maybe share it there. Well, actually, someone invited me if I could share it there. And I was just having such a hard time with the title, trying to keep it short. And I sort of mix the communications component, because I have a degree in communications, with how do people sort of highlight a product, or a service. Well, they brand it. And what does branding look like for a product or service? And so it just was like one thing that led to the other, and Brand the Interpreter, the title, was born.
Very
So
cool.
that was a slide deck.
And your podcast, were you trying to reach more of the interpreter community, the larger public? Did you try to more? Did you have more like educational components to make our work more understood? So how did you, and also at the same time, how did you make sure that you could brand yourself to a much larger public?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it was a combination again of different things, which is I say that because I feel like it's important that we all recognize that when we're trying to create something, particularly if in our mind is innovative, it's going to be a collage of your different skill sets. So I feel that in my case, I put together something that I felt was going to be for an audience such as myself that was looking for resources at one point out into the profession in the different areas of specialty that existed, because I was working in education, which at that time was not a standardized specialty area. And so there was sort of, sometimes I would reach out to someone that had created already the systems internally, and it was K through 12 related, and I would never hear back from them. So no one would ever, return my calls or my emails. If I was able to find some sort of information, it was scattered. And so it took me a few years to really put together information that fit the model that we wanted to create in this organization. And so I thought, it would be great if there was one centralized location in which we heard a variety of different stories, the different specialty areas of interpreting in one place, so that if someone is searching a how-to, they get it from the professionals themselves in one location. And so that was sort of my idea, was for other professionals that maybe, I don't know, wanted to break into, some sort of a specialty area, and there was an interpreter that had that experience and was able to share the story. That was as far as my mind went. And when I was thinking about the podcast, is would it be great if we can hear the stories of interpreters, how they created whatever it is that they created for themselves without having to wait for a conference, but having, it being able to just one click away and hear their stories and what their journey looked like. So that's really what it was for me.
So were you? So basically, if I understand, it was meant like a directory of interpreters, and through that directory, you would be able to hear interpreters' stories, so they can brand themselves through that process, right? So it's
Yeah.
not the main focus was not the podcast. The podcast seems to be a means to an end.
Yes. 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 And so by thinking about branding, it was, I helped brand the profession as a whole. That was my role as the host, was branding the role, highlighting the role of the profession by sharing the stories of so many professionals out in the field. But at the same time, what was happening was branding the individual, the guests themselves. And so, I would push out content, their name, what they specialize in, the title of I did the promoting of them. And what was funny is that that's exactly what started happening. I would get people saying, hey, I'm trying to reach out to Brian, that was, your guest on this last episode, and I thought it was great, very relatable story. Or I would have guests say, hey, as a result of our conversation, people have been contacting me because now they know what they specialize in, what is their passion, what their story is. Some people resonated with stories, some people resonated with their specialty area. So it just worked out that way. Yeah.
It sounds like you love it.
Yeah, I do, because I always felt like the stories, they made my podcast what it is, but it also helped them make more connections, perhaps, than if they were out at a conference that someone couldn't reach them. So yeah, that
Yeah.
definitely brought a smile on my face.
Yeah, I agree. Like these podcasts are really something in terms of creating that community. Like I noticed a lot of your guests that you have in your podcast are similar to some of our guests that we've had in our podcast. So we're we sort of like third degree communication, I guess, before we've met. We knew of people, the same people. So yeah, it's not a big world, the interpretation one. So it's but it's interesting that like yeah, like with our podcast we don't see it ending anytime soon. We have so much more material to cover, and I'm sure you feel the same way about Brand the Interpreter. Like there's the potential is limitless, right?
Yeah, I think it gives us a little bit of what people or an audience, a listener, will want to hear. So you may not always have somebody that is interested in hearing the way my podcast, for example, is formatted, which is very conversational, sort of like this format. Yes, we do bring in a specific topic, particularly if it's near and dear to the heart of the guest, but it's not Q&A in the sense of the traditional way of, we're only focusing on those hard skills that we learn. We're not talking about necessarily something that they can go and learn off of something from a conference or a workshop. It touches a little bit on the human aspect of the profession, as well as the specialty area, or something that guest really cares for. And then you've got other podcasts that exist that are very focused on the very specifics as to how it relates to the profession and how it could support that individual that is listening in the work that they're already doing. So I think just being able to have a variety of different podcast styles is what's great, because now there's so many of us out there, where in the beginning it wasn't as much or as
Yeah,
many.
and I'm sure like someone like Corinne, like the podcast episode that you would have with her would be completely different from the one that we have with her. So that's really cool too. Like that we can see two different sides of Corinne
Yes.
or the other guests.
Yes, absolutely agree. Yes. And I think also she's a great example of when we talk about branding and putting yourself out there. She's an excellent example of that because of the
Uh-huh.
opportunities that come. And I think that for me has always been a thing. It's like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Yeah. There's strategy to it. Yes. But don't be afraid to put yourself out there and the things that so that other people can see what it is that you've been doing behind the scenes and how maybe they can tap into that same area too. So yeah, she's a great example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I think about the evolution, for instance, of this podcast, in the beginning, I think that Brian and I, we had a bit more of a informative aspect, and more like what is interpretation, and a bit more like educational videos. And I think that over time, as I've noticed our own evolution with this podcast, I think that we're more now into listening to some stories and really seeing who's behind the microphone. And I think that you end up with a lot more interesting stories. The human stories can't be repeated, but cold information, basically anyone can Google it. And I think people
Yes.
are more curious about people's lives rather than just plain information.
Absolutely 100% agree. I think the majority of the feedback from the community has always been, um, I'm from the same town your guest said he was from. I can't believe that there's someone else in the same profession. It's always the personal connection as opposed to what they specialize in or where they went to school, sometimes even some where they went to school. But I think it's always just the personal story that makes that connection with the listeners. So that's what makes it great and
Yeah.
fun.
It's also amazing to see how things evolve after you talk about it over a few drinks, Alain. So
That's something I've not yet tried, and I don't know.
we've yeah, this is some of our best brainstorming has been over a gin and tonic or two.
Yeah, I still remember after a few drinks at a cocktail bar in Montreal. I must have been like something like 1 or 2 a.m. I was like, "Hey Brian, why don't we do a podcast?" And Brian's like, "Ah, great, let's do a podcast, yay!" And then the next day, a bit of hungover, and Brian's like, "Hey, when are we doing the podcast?" And I'm like, "Did we really talk about that?" All right, then. All right, let's do it.
I thought I dreamt it.
Yep. Now, going back to your professional world, like the professional life with being an interpreter in the K to 12 setting, there must be tons of challenges to that as well, right? Like, I'm assuming you see a lot of kids interpreting for their parents, like that kind of situation or scenario, or
Yeah, that's what's interesting about it is, just knowing or getting a feel for what the general public understands about interpreting K through 12. So the interesting part for spoken language interpreters is that we hardly work with students. We work
okay,
mainly with the community, so the families of the students. And it really depends on the type of meeting that is being held, but typically it may be something related to a student, and what related to a student could be academic. So a lot of people think about, oh, it's like maybe parent teacher conferences, but there's actually a lot more that's involved in the education world aside from just knowing how your student is doing. Because of all of the laws that surround education, there's a lot of things that families must be well informed of. There's a lot of due process for a lot of things that occur in education, and therefore making the type of meeting pretty complicated, actually, and it not so easily done by someone that is fluent in both the languages. So it has been a challenge throughout my career in education for two reasons. Number one, highlighting the the complications or the challenges, I should say, of what it actually entails to interpret in specific types of meetings. So one side is informing the general public that work in this area about interpreting. What is the difference between a translator and an interpreter, right? We get down to the basics. What is consecutive versus simultaneous? What is required of a consecutive interpreter versus what is required of a simultaneous interpreter? Why do we need two instead of one for something that's been scheduled for over an hour? So all of these things are things that in one institution you have to create if it doesn't exist. What we're seeing across the nation, and it's getting a little better now because we have associations that are supporting in that work now. They didn't exist before when I first started in this field, or rather in this specialty area. So it was really
You mean in
challenging
education?
in education, yes, really challenging to inform, the staff, administrators, management, the teachers, how to work with an interpreter, why it's important to receive context. So there was challenges there, and then it was challenges in identifying and finding individuals that wanted to come in trained and break into the field of education to be able to support the work that we did. So, I mean, it's a variety of different things that we actually do work with in education, more than parent teacher conference, or even more than, I can go beyond as to say even more than special education, because I think that a lot of individuals that are familiar with education or a little bit more familiar with education immediately think about special education services when it comes to interpreting.
So, how would you explain to someone who doesn't know about our field what the difference is in your field between a bilingual individual who can do a basic interpretation and a professional? How would you explain that distinction?
Well, if I was speaking to an individual that already works within the educational setting, I would start with an understanding that education, like any other specialty area, has its own technical terminology. Being able to understand the educational system is in itself something that needs to be learned and understood for context purposes. So when we're providing interpretation, we must be able to understand the big picture because, as we all know, we don't interpret just words, but rather meaning for meaning. And so without understanding the big picture, it's really difficult to convey something in a way in which it's understood by the listener. And so explaining, just the basics at fluency in two languages that's just the beginning, right? That's your basic that we need. We need an understanding of the role of the interpreter so that we know what that looks like within a setting. In educational settings, these meetings are usually held with more than two individuals in the room. Unlike perhaps if we would compare it to maybe a medical encounter, for example, in which it may usually be many times provider and patient and interpreter. In education, you have a whole team usually involved. So being able to sit down and say, just navigating the role of the interpreter, navigating and managing the flow of communication within a setting that involves dialogue is complex. That requires a trained individual to be able to manage the flow of communication, understand their role, and know how to provide interpreting services. Bilingual individual isn't just born with that because they have the ability to speak two languages or more. That takes training. And so that would be like a very basic way of explaining why we are pushing for trained individuals in these settings. But as you could imagine, it's sort of like it's a recurring, it takes consistent effort, consistent communication with the right individuals in
You
order to
have to
even make a little
re-educate
bit
the
of
client every
progress. Oh,
time.
for sure. Every time. Absolutely. Every time. So it's complex. It took, in my case, 10 years in that one institution to get to where we could say, now we could step away and someone else will continue the process, because it is complex when you don't have the guidance of a bigger institution such as what exists now with the associations.
And do you think that the branding that you did with your podcast and the website, are there any tangible impact from your efforts?
I think by individuals that have been seeking perhaps examples, specific examples of what to do. So I have had individuals that have reached out that were happy to hear that education was highlighted because they've been navigating these challenges on their own, which I think in essence, that's really what the goal was in terms of my specialty area. So I specialize in public education, and I wanted individuals that other professionals that heard the podcast to know that, so that they also knew that there was someone out there that had navigated those same challenges, that they weren't alone. I think now there are so many more resources out there. Now we've got a couple of association that is taking over and handling the communication aspect nationwide, for interpreters that are in this field. So there's a lot more guidance. I think for me in the beginning, it was just, hey, if you happen to be in this field, so was I. And I'm going to bring guests on the show to help us talk about these very specific challenges for this very specific area in interpreting. So that was my main goal. But of course, like me, there's so many other individuals out there that exist. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just but a speck.
Now, just to for the listeners out there, how often do you put out a new episode, and is there a specific day that people should tune into?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think it's changed throughout the years. In the beginning, when I first started, it was one episode a month, right? Which is really
Okay.
what I thought I could manage. And then we went to 3 episodes a month. And now I'm back to only one episode a month. So it really depends on my schedule and what I've got going on at the time, because I nearly killed myself with the 3 episodes a month. um, I
I'm
do
doing once a
post
week, and
edit.
I know it's a lot of
Yeah,
work.
Alain knows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's just, in the beginning it was me, I tried bringing in somebody, but it's just, I'm one of those individuals that it's like, if it didn't, the person doesn't have that ear for, what it is that I'm wanting to push out. It is called Brand the Interpreter. And I was always very, just very particular, continue to be very particular about what my guests sound like. I don't want them to be like, oh, regret being on there because I said too many uhs, or there was a long pause between my response. All of those little details, I think,
You
makes a
edit?
difference. I do. I post edit. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's the reason
that's the
why
it
I
takes a
include all
while.
kinds of different things. Yeah. So now it's like I'm working on a variety of different projects. So I'm back to one episode a month.
I
And
put
you
my
have
entire trust in Alain, so he does all the post editing. He's a magician when it comes to that stuff.
do you have a favorite episode?
I have lots of favorite episodes, but I think my favorite, one of my favorite episodes, his name is Ewandro. And I think Ewandro, he's a former conference interpreter, or continues to be. I think now he helps interpreters more. Um,
Hey, what
he,
language?
he's Portuguese. I know he speaks three. It's English, Portuguese, and I can't remember. Sorry, Ewandro, what his third one was, because, they need three languages.
Comment
Um,
after. Let
I
us know.
will. Yeah, I'll let you know. But he's a storyteller. And I
Yeah,
think for me that, it just makes such a difference in the podcast. When my podcast is audio only, by the way. So I don't have, the full version of it on YouTube. You don't see the video. It's audio only. So for me it was so important to be able to create something that just felt delicious in the ears, right? As people were listening, for people to be able to engage with the back and forth, let their minds wander. And so when you get a guest that just matches that what you're looking for, it just takes the show, I think, that episode to a whole new level. And he was one of my favorites. But like him, there's been several other stories where it's just like, wow, what they share. I'm just so grateful that they were able to open up. Not everyone's able to open up, because a lot of people are nervous about, what am I going to say? And it's going to be recorded. It's going to get thrown out there. And, so there are a lot of people that are like, I don't want to share too much.
Well, actually, sometimes when when the podcast is over, I feel that the tension in the room sometimes goes down, and then people really start talking.
yeah.
And then I'm
Post
like, yeah.
podcast.
And then we end up talking more after the podcast and during the
Yes,
podcast. And I'm like, hey, that would have been such an
that would
interesting
have been a
moment. Why didn't we
great
record that part instead?
Let me
And
It's
send
the
the
found
record
an
again.
interpretation after hours.
yeah, where's the
Yeah,
whiskey?
so that's happened. That's so true. It's so true. Yeah,
It
we
is
don't fight.
absolutely. Yeah, we're like, well, the thing is too is that there's a lot of stuff that in our profession we're kind of like the fly in the wall, right? So we're privy to all this information that nobody else is privy to, and we have to keep those things confidential. So we do have to be careful what we say a lot of the
Absolutely.
times.
And we have to be careful about opinion as well, because
Yeah,
as an interpreter, I mean, there's always a social issue, a political issue, a war, you
Yes.
name it, and we all have our thoughts and opinion. And then I think that a lot of interpreters, including myself and maybe Brian and you as well, I think that we are always careful to say, well, I better not say this or that, because I may alienate a client, because we may not have the same political opinions, ideas, you name it, right? So Brian and I on
Absolutely.
this podcast, and there's some truth to it. We always say we're Switzerland. We have a neutral face.
yeah,
Uh,
Yes. Yes.
and,
No, I
and
try to stay away from those hot topics. I mean, there's so many spaces where you can go grab that information, but I do, and on the podcast, I definitely do remain neutral in our conversations. And I don't think I ever hardly bring in anything unless it's impacting our profession. Then that's different, right? We're bringing in some conversations.
but
yeah.
it's hard not to let it slip.
True.
That's why
that's
you
why I
post
always
edit
say
everything, Anna.
exactly. That's why I always say, don't worry, I post edits. So if there's anything that slips, you let me know and I'll remove it.
Yeah. No, I mean, we've had people too that like, can you add this to the description? Because I forgot to mention this. Or like, maybe we should take this part out because it's not really relevant to the conversation that we're actually having, and it kind of takes away from some of the stuff. So yeah, we do that kind of thing in the background too. And
Yeah,
yeah, but like you said, it's time consuming because you're like the post editing takes a lot longer than this
it does.
actual 45 minutes of a podcast, right? So
It does. It's a lot of hard work, y'all. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
How many hours per to do for an episode? How you spend a lot of
Okay.
time? Like,
So my episodes are lengthy, right? So my episodes can run anywhere between an hour to an hour 30 minutes, depending on the
wow.
conversation, right? Yeah, there's no intermission, so people
Any
get to hear
sponsors?
the whole thing, or
This is the
it
time
just
where you go
depends.
get your popcorn and your drink,
Exactly.
and you can come back for the second part.
Taking a break. So it could, yeah, it could extend to that long, but I think it just, what was the question again?
How much time do you spend on
Oh
an
yeah.
episode
Let's see
just
what
to make this
happens
one
when you go
longer?
to I actually can spend, if it's a 60-minute episode, I can spend easily an entire day working on that, because I will include, if I've got sponsors, I do that sponsorship I insert that myself, right? So it's like, if I've got sponsors, I'm inserting those audios. Cleaning up really depends on the speaker. You've got people that are great public speakers, and you've got some that need that help on the editing. And so again, like I said, once that conversation is over, now my objective goes to my audience. So is it going to sound great in the ear as they're listening? Is it going to bore them? Is it going to be like, oh, this is frustrating, get to the answer, or something of the sort? I've cut myself out because I feel like, oh, that went in circles. So there's a
We're very
lot. It just
critical on
depends.
ourselves.
Oh, so much. Yeah. If I
Yeah.
could, I would just remove all of me and just allow the guests to tell their story. That's it.
And I'm assuming you're a lot like us. Like we just don't like we come up with stuff on the fly right now because like we want the conversation to be natural and just free flowing. So we don't want to pre-script anything.
Absolutely. I think I've only had but a handful of individuals that have actually felt more comfortable with me sending them the questions ahead of time. That's the type of Q&A. I think, even though I tried to describe what my format is, I think they felt more comfortable with receiving the questions beforehand. So at that point, it's kind of like I do have to add a disclaimer, like I may ask other questions that are also relevant, just depending on our conversation. And I may not ask many of the questions that are on this list. But that's great. Thankfully, it's only been a couple times.
It's hard to ask an interpreter to come empty-handed to it
Exactly.
because it's like it's not an assignment, but it's kind of like like we need some documents ahead of time to prepare and all this stuff. Like,
I so agree. That's so true.
But usually, I tend to find that translators are a bit more quiet than interpreters, obviously. I think that the conversation is very different with a translator than an interpreter. We've
It's
had
true.
interpreters and translators as guests, and I think that more often than not, interpreters are more always it's their voice. So since we use our voice all the time, and it's all about communication and rhythm and feeling and all of that, I think that we can go a lot deeper. But sometimes I feel that with some translators, it gets more into a fact check, a fact base rather, a fact base set of question and answers, and then progressing from that.
That's so true, actually. Yeah, you're right. I've only had but a handful of only translators. So there's some interpreters that also work as translators, but I've only had, I don't know, maybe not even a handful, maybe like a couple of translators. But I could totally see that. Yeah, I could totally see that.
yeah, no, we've had that experience as well. But also, like we've had interpreters that are in completely different sectors that we may never get to experience ourselves. So that's another awesome way to include people like in a different way. Like if you're interested in like the higher courts and the criminal court, like Ahmed, when we had him over, like it was a completely different topic from, say, like now we're talking about education and podcasts, and then next week I forget who's next week, but it's going to be something completely different too, right? So it's important to have that variety on the podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it.
And you,
It froze
you
for a
said,
second. I
oh, okay.
lost I'm going to edit this later, but speaking of editing, it kind of froze for a second. And then I was like, okay, what's going on here?
Heart starts beating.
We
For
did
me?
that on purpose. Mireya and I were just having our own conversation on the side.
No, I kind of heard Alain next week, and then I was like, "What? What's next week? Who's next week?" And I was like, "Okay,
We don't remember.
rules and regulations about okay." So, are you planning some other episodes, or it's been about 5 years now? So, are you continuing on your project, or it's more on a standby right now? So, where are you up to in terms of number of episodes?
Yeah, I continue to do episodes. Like I said, I've sort of gone back to the one episode a month. It has been 5 years. Actually, this year, it was my 5 year anniversary in February with the podcast, and I do plan on continuing. But I think what's really changing for me is I'm getting this sort of feeling of it's time to do some sort of change with it for me. So I want to try to
You have
identify.
a co-host.
I think perhaps, yeah, because I feel like it's like I'm ready to add a different dynamic to it. I'm not sure, what that dynamic is, because I do have a pretty steady following with Brand the Interpreter. So I don't know if there's going to be a spin to a new show, or if I'm going to, evolve this one. I'm still sort of dabbling back and forth, because I'm one of those that it's like, okay, I'm taking too much on. And maybe I need to sort of step back and, and rethink this a little bit, unless I bring in a team finally.
Yeah.
Well,
No,
and
I love watching. I love, sorry, not watching, listening to Brand the Interpreter.
Oh,
But for
thanks,
those
Brian.
out there, we're like, you're on Spotify, Apple,
Yes, I'm
iTunes.
on iTunes,
how did you get on
Spotify. I mean,
Apple?
pretty
It's
much
so
everywhere.
complicated.
I know
How did you get on
if there's
Apple? I
any
mean,
Oh,
Apple
really?
people out there that can help
no,
us out.
really. I mean, I tried. It's like filling the form. It's like starting a company. It's basically you have to register like a company, and they're asking all of these forms and the tax numbers and all of that. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not even here to make money with it. I just want to publish a show, and I don't have time to fill all these forms. Did you go through that same process, or did I just enter the wrong channel here?
I did not go through that same process. The actual when I started, I did my research as well, and just going out there and just trying to see what my options were. And I
But I'm
ended up
talking
going.
specifically about Apple.
Yeah, no, that's why, because who I used as a podcasting platform, like to what do you call it? Publish my episodes.
Yeah.
Buzzsprout. They did all that for me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they've got this back channel where they basically say, "Hey, these are your options. Boom, 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 boom. Which ones do you want?" And basically, it's like it was a one-click thing. So of course, it was in the beginning. I was like, "Well, I want all of them, right? Just get me on all of them."
Okay.
That was it. One click.
We'll talk later about that. I will talk later about that, because right now
Yeah.
I use Spotify and YouTube, which was super easy. But
Yeah.
then when I got into Apple, I sort of hit a brick wall, and I was like,
Okay.
that's why. To everyone, I promised weeks and weeks ago, months now, that we would be on Apple soon, and soon became never, like many things in life. So perhaps now we'll get it back again. But I wanted to ask you one more question about the podcast. Did the growth, was the growth organic, or did you publish a lot on LinkedIn? So how did you build your audience?
Well,
Not
I'd
that I'm
like to.
trying to steal anything from you.
No, please, by all means, let's share. No, I'd like to believe that it was very organic, and by organic I mean it was just my efforts as one person. I didn't hire a company. I didn't do anything of the sort. It was mainly by word of mouth, and so I first shared it that it was something I was thinking about doing, and I even gave I exposed like a date. Like I just said, hey, beginning on this date, I'm going to be publishing to my network, a brand new podcast about interpreters, for interpreters about interpreters. So that was my network, and then it was like, holy shoot, I already sent out the date where I'm going to start it. Now I really got to do this, right? Because I started getting feedback by people, and all I asked is if you could please share with your network. Yes. And so that's how I started on my end. And then after that, it was one of those things where I, just started using social media as a ways of promoting. And so the social media piece was mainly the two platforms that I felt most comfortable in, which was Instagram and LinkedIn. And I started utilizing that as a way of promoting the episodes, promoting the individuals, promoting the podcast. In the beginning, it was just like, it's coming, it's coming. And again, timing, I feel like, really played a role. COVID was happening, and we needed our minds elsewhere. That wasn't with everything that was going on. Eventually, we were going to get back to that's what everyone's hope, right? The normal life. And so, what do we do as interpreters when we have the opportunity to? Well, we like to learn. And I think that's why individuals started tuning in. Somehow my connections grew, and social media, I think, really was the reason why it got to the ears that it landed on. Yeah.
Well, I think that this 5-year anniversary is a huge milestone. Like, there's a lot of people who during the pandemic didn't know what to do, and they're like, "Well, maybe I'll do a podcast, or maybe I'll start baking, or something like that." But I think the longevity of your podcast is really like, you've stood the test of time. What you're doing is working, and it resonates with people, and it's a great thing to continue doing, I think. And I mean, if you want to reinvent it, that's awesome too. If you want to change the name or whatever, but I think what you're doing right now, it's working and it's great.
Yeah, it is working. I've it's interesting because I just a quick story. One day I remember I went to a conference, and all this will remain anonymous, I went
Want me
to
to
a
edit later?
conference. You could leave this one for sure, just because I feel like it's so powerful, to Brian's point. And someone made a comment to me about the podcast, and although I feel it might have been well intended, it didn't land that way. And so the comment was just, somewhere around the lines of, every time that I hear about Brian the Interpreter, I think, wow, like, so much effort for just a podcast. And at first I thought, well, no, I mean, this is my baby, right? This is something I created on my own from the beginning, and I'm really proud of it. But I think it sort of left this, like, sour taste
So
in my
much
mouth
effort for just a
for just
podcast?
a podcast. So much effort for just a
I hate
podcast.
that word because some people say
Yeah.
like, "Oh, you're just a translator, or you're just an interpreter." I'm like, "Oh my
Yeah.
God, it's so much more than that."
There's a bit of okay, just to put in context, and I don't want to interrupt the flow of your story, but was that an interpreter who said that, or someone in our
Yeah.
like, it was an
No, it was
interpreter
an
who said that?
interpreter. Yeah, it was an interpreter. Here's the kicker. It was a past guest.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. And so it was like years later after, and the individual says that, and I was just like, wow, that I don't know if I was trying to really think about what positive connotation could I add to that? What did they really mean? Who knows? At the end I said, you know what? And this is where I'm leading to. This podcast of mine has opened the doors to so many income producing opportunities for me. The income generating opportunities for me, that I would not go back and put any less effort to it. I think if anything, if I could, I would do even more. I would hire a team to do the things that I cannot do, to expose the stories of interpreters from around the world even more if I could. I haven't been able to yet, but that is my plan. And thanks to this platform, like I said, I have been given opportunities that I don't think otherwise I would have had the chance to. So it's just moral of the story is, hey, longevity, right? A passion that you keep pushing forward. You will have people out there that are going to minimize your effort, sadly, and even within the profession. But we all know what we get out of it. I get two things out of it. Obviously, a love for the craft, and yeah, I get paid to do other stuff in
Well,
addition to.
but if I try to, I'm trying to take a step back here, and I just like you, always try to think in a positive way or to give a positive spin for something. And I'm just saying that perhaps the comment was more intended as, oh, no one expects that a podcast would require so much work.
Thank
That
you, Alan. I
could have
appreciate that.
been it,
You finally,
but
after
I
all
don't
these
know the
years.
details about the rest.
That's so
I don't
true.
want to say that there's professional jealousy or anything, but to your point, one thing that I will add is 2 nights ago, we're having dinner with a friend of mine who owns a couple of restaurants here in Quebec City. And I was telling him, I think that everyone should start a podcast. Like, I think that any profession that you have, you got to start a podcast because people are curious about the behind the scenes. So if you are in, like, if you have a restaurant, you should start a podcast to tell about what's going on behind the scenes or in the kitchen or some stories. Or it could be another friend of mine who he has a construction company and he installs windows and doors. And I was like, well, you know what? Maybe you should start a podcast too. And now everyone that I know, I'm like, hey, you should start a podcast too.
Yeah.
No, but I think that like I was reading here in Canada. I was reading the news a couple of days ago, and they said that I think it was 40%, 47% of Canadians now are cord cutters. It means that they don't have cable anymore, and they don't get informed through television. They get informed through podcast or
Yeah.
all kinds of YouTube videos or whatever
Social
social media
media.
they like.
Yeah, whatever's
It
on.
creates its sense of problems.
Yeah.
It's not, no, but the thing is, you could have it on your phone, but it doesn't mean you're not watching TV. So,
Right.
but basically, the extent of that is more like a pre-programmed show at that time,
Hmm.
or let's say in Canada, there's a CBC, Radio Canada, CTV, Global News, like those mainstream channels, the equivalent of CNN or Fox or whatever in the States. But people don't even get informed through those anymore. People go to podcasts because they want to have the raw information, and sometimes it's unfiltered and more or less unedited.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I agree.
So,
Absolutely.
I'm not Canadian, but I would be part of that percentage if I were. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I don't have cable either. Mm.
Well, it's good that somebody there was unlike Alain, I thought it was a pretty negative comment what that person said, but it gave you the fuel and the energy to do something good with it, which I think is really admirable. And it's yeah, and I like I said, I think the longevity speaks for itself.
Absolutely, yes. But thank you, Alan. I appreciate that because
After all these years.
yeah, for all these years,
I
for the longest time,
tried,
I was like,
you know.
I still can't figure it out. I don't understand what the point of that comment was. I'm sure you're right, Alan. I'm
No
sure
one
you're
knows.
Well, if that interpreter is watching this podcast, please write your comments in the section below.
That's right. There will also be a quiz where we're going to ask everyone to watch every episode of Brand the Interpreter and guess who the host was or guess who the guest was.
Oh no! Let's take out that part that it was a past guest. Every past guest gonna be like, "Was that me?
Was it me?" No,
Should I
they
put
will
a
know. They will know.
Should I put a disclaimer at first? This following program contains scenes with an unknown interpreter. Viewer discretion is advised.
Please."
Well, on that note, I guess it's. I hate to cut the conversation because it's just getting juicy, but yeah. But this is it's flown by. Holy, it's been a great episode. And again, Mireya, like I'm one of your biggest fans for Brand the Interpreter. I hope that it continues bringing you the success that it has in the last few years. Like you said, has brought you a lot of like financial positive outcomes. And yeah, and I think like for Alain, I think we talk about it a lot too, is that when we finish all of our episodes, we are filled with energy, like a renewed energy to be able to continue and do even better in our profession.
Yeah. Do you guys do a little happy dance at the end too? And it was like a good conversation. There's just me.
I've never seen that dance, to be honest.
That was a good one.
Yeah, I don't dance much. Unlike you, Brian, I've seen you dance a few times, but
Yes.
yeah. Nah, I've got concrete blocks on my feet for some reason. Must be my knee. All right, so thank you so much for having this great conversation with us, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to reverse roles.
Yes,
And
definitely
brand
do.
ourselves on Brand the Interpreter. But if anyone else is listening out there, well, go to brandtheinterpreter.com, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right.
Yes,
It'll
that's
be
right.
in the description below, if I don't forget to add it. And
Jeez.
no, because sometimes I always say, oh yeah, I will put these links and these links, and then I just edit and I send it, and I was like, oh right, and like 3-4 days later, I just add the links again. All right. Too many things to think about. But thank you so much, Brian,
Yes, thank you.
Mireya. Everyone, please like, share, subscribe, comment. Go to brandtheinterpreter.com, and we'll see each other some other time for another episode of Fun Interpretation Podcast. Good night and good luck.
Good
Thanks.
night.
Thank you.